youth identity. According to Chinese sociologist Fei Xiaotong proposed in 1947, appreciate the beauties of others and let all beauty coexist. Only then can the world be harmony. This idea highlights the importance of cultural diversity in building a society. However, in the context of globalization, this ideal is increasingly challenged. While globalization promotes development, it often leads to cultural homogenization, where the dominant cultures expand and minority groups become marginalized. China provides a great example of this issue. As a multi-ethnic country with 56 officially recognized groups, it contains great cultural and linguistic diversity. However, since Han is the dominant, it largely shapes the mainstream cultural and the linguistic environment. In fact, ethnic minorities only take less than 9% of the total population. Because of this imbalance, mainstream culture and language become more dominant, while the minority language face more pressure in public spaces. Inner Mongolia, located in the northern part of China, as the map shows, is one of China's ethnic autonomous regions where both Mongolian people and Han people live there. So this creates a bilingual and a multicultural environment where both Mongolian script and the Chinese characters can be observed in daily life. So in this context, most of the signs are in bilingual form, this including the university signs, the public transportation, the road signs, and the shop signs. However, at the same time, broader social political shifts may influence how minority languages are used and perceived in public spaces. For example, when we're doing a comparison of the same street at different years, we can see some of the signs switch from bilingual to Mandarin only. And also, I found that the communication in Mongolian is increasingly decreased in these years. So what is causing these problems? To better understand this, I did a literature review in 3 different fields, including the language policies, the linguistic studies, and the cultural identity and youth perception. So over the past decades, China has been promoting the idea of a Chinese nation community. One key policy supporting this goal is the promotion of standard Mandarin. According to Chuan, in 2022, this policy plays a central role in shaping the power structure of language and unifying the national identity in multi-ethnic regions. In the context, Lin and Jackson in 2021 found that Mandarin is often treated as a symbol of modernization, economic development, and national unity. This raises an important question. What happens to other minority languages and cultures? Lin and Jackson's research suggests that the minority languages are often viewed as less practical as Mandarin-dominated environment. As Cole and Weilander argue, minority languages are increasingly treated as symbolic cultural heritage rather than an active tool used in daily communication. Nancy Homburger in 1998 concludes, the widespread use of a dominant language in daily life reduced the frequency and functionality of minority languages, further limiting opportunities for their transmission across generations. So, how does Inner Mongolia respond to this broader trend? According to a 2024 policy issued by the Inner Mongolia Ethnic Affairs Commission, the region is expected to actively promote the national economic language, common language, which is Mandarin, while strengthening a shared national identity. Landscape observation is a key approach to understanding how Mongolian language visibility has changed under current policies. Studies by Bayer in 2025 in Sealing-Hot and Yu and its high study in 2022 in Bainor shows the significant changes in bilingual signage. This includes the switching orders of Mandarin and Mongolian and also replace the bilingual signage with the Mandarin-only signage. According to the conclusion from these papers, these changes are not random, but reflect the broader policy directions, especially the promotion of standard Mandarin and the goal to form a national unity. In previous research, Mandarin youth are often described as living in a Mandarin-dominated environment. Studies such as DCI in 2022 highlight that Mandarin is mainly used in formal and public context, while Mongolian is more commonly used among peers and families. This suggests that language use is strongly shaped by the social environment, which may also influence identity formation. In addition, education has been widely identified as another key factor in language transmission. Previous study by Clothy in 2005 suggests that the schooling plays an important role in shaping both language proficiency and cultural awareness among the minority youth. Although existing studies provide valuable insights in language policy, linguist landscape, and education, there are still several gaps remain. First, most of the previous research focused on language policy or linguist landscape at the broader regional level rather than on a specific urban area like Huhat, where policy implementation and landscape change is more visible and direct as the capital of Inner Mongolia. Second, while both language policy and linguist landscape has been widely studied, they are often treated separately, with limited attention to their interaction and how these environments are interpreted by young people. From a psychological perspective, Brange in 2021 suggests that youth identity formation is shaped by both social, cultural environment, and personal experiences. However, existing research does not fully explain how structural forces such as visibility changes are connected to daily language use and how this influence youth culture identity. Therefore, my research question is, how do changes in bilingual signage affect and reflect and influence youth language, youth, and cultural identity in Huhat? To answer my question, I used multiple methods combining both quantitative and qualitative data. This includes the landscape observation, interviews, and a youth survey. This allowed me to connect changes in public spaces with individual experiences. So first, the landscape observation plays a really important role to understand my question, since it represents how Mongolians are viewed in public spaces. So I selected two representative areas in Huhat, on Commercial Street and a residential street. This way of dividing groups is adapted from Yuan Cai's paper of linguist landscape analysis of Bainar City. The commercial street is a busy tourist spot in the city center, while the residential street represents a more local community-based environment. This comparison shows how language use differs from different urban functions. The results show a clear contrast between the two areas. In the commercial street, Mandarin only signage dominance, accounting for over 90%, while the bilingual signage is extremely limited. In contrast, the residential street shows a more balanced distribution with a significantly higher presence of bilingual signage. This can also be observed by the photos of these two streets. In the commercial street, bilingual signage is almost absent. You can see there's only some Chinese characters on the signage. But when we turn to the residential street, we can see the both Mandarin Chinese characters and also the Mongolian script appears. So also one particular finding of this is a paradox. Although over 90% of the shops on the commercial street sells the traditional Mongolian products, barely none of them use Mongolian on their signage. This suggests that Mongolian culture still appears in commercial context, but the language itself is absent. In this context, Mongolian culture becomes a symbolic or economic resource rather than a functional means of communication. Rather than being an isolated commercial phenomenon, this reflects deeper structural changes that shapes how culture is publicly represented. To better understand the factors behind these visible changes, I interviewed with shop owners in these two streets. The participants include both Mongolian and Han people with diverse perspectives. So the interviewees mentioned three key factors through their answers. So the first one is the policy relaxation. Shop owners expressed that after 2023, enforcement of bilingual signage became less strict. The commercial street was designed as a tourist spot at that period, so it has frequent replacement of older business. As a result, many new shops use Mandarin-only signage for convenience. Second, the commercial logic. On the commercial street, efficiency and accessibility are more important, and Mandarin is considered more practical for consumers from other parts of China. Third, practical problems. A lot of printing shops just don't provide Mongolian signage under current policies, so it become harder for people to make Mongolian signage in this context. From overall, these factors suggest that the signage choice are mainly shaped by external conditions rather than personal preference. From an identity perspective, cultural identity is not disappearing, but it's more often shown in symbolic ways as people have less spaces to use Mongolian language. These structural changes in language landscape may further shape how individuals perceive language visibility and interpret culture changes. To understand these effects, I did a survey among local youth in Huhat. The survey included 25 participants with 60% of Mongolian and 40% of Han people. According to WHO, youth are defined as people who age between 14 and 25. Hence, participants were grouped by age to distinguish youth from older groups. The survey included multiple choice questions, Likert scale questions, and open-ended questions, allowing me to examine both the perceptions and the personal experiences. I got support with this survey from Yu Qiaoguo, a Mongolian culture study professor from University of Inner Mongolia. The results shows a clear difference between ethnic groups. 60% of Mongolian participants reported a noticeable decline in Mongolian visibility, compared with 37.5% of the Han participants. This suggests that participants of language visibility are influenced by the individual's cultural background and personal connection to this language. Based on these differences, it's important to look more closely at how language perception relates to both identity and social language use. The Likert scale results shows a gap between the symbolic identity and actual language use. Most participants strongly agree that Mongolian culture is an important part of their composition, so the sense of identity is really strong at the symbolic level. However, when it comes to actually using or learning Mongolian in current environment, the willingness is really low. Instead, people tend to choose their language use and inherit based on the dominant social and policy environment around them. So overall, people still have really strong awareness towards culture, but the actual steps that really affect those cultural inheritance are influenced by the external environment. To further understanding the gap between identity and language use, I interviewed 2 Mongolian youth. In daily life, both participants expressed a strong preference for using Mandarin since they live in a Mandarin-dominant environment. Mongolian is mainly used within families or among Mongolian peers. They also mentioned that with reduced Mongolian education among younger generations, the use of Mongolian in this context is even lower. Since participants didn't see language loss as just a personal choice. Instead, they view it as a result of broader social and policy trends. From their perspective, policy is the most important factor shaping changes in Mongolian language and cultures. They explained that the promotion of standard Mandarin, together with broader policy directions, has reshaped both education and daily communication. Compared with visible changes in signage, participants see policy as the deeper force behind this shift. In other words, changes in linguistic landscape are not the root cause, but rather a reflection of broader policy-driven transformation. Education was also highlighted as another key factor. Participants point out that Mongolian language education has been reduced, especially in the primary school. As a result, younger generations tend to have lower proficiency and less motivation to actively use or learn Mongolian. Participants also expressed concerns about the long-term consequences of this trend. They believe that under current educational and policy conditions, it's become increasingly difficult for Mongolian culture to be passed on to the future generations. One interviewee even suggests that minority cultures may gradually be absorbed into a dominant culture system, reflecting broader structural pressures over individual choices. Overall, these findings suggest that the visible linguistic landscape is ultimately driven by deeper structural factors, especially policy and education. These factors also have important implications for the future sustainability of minority cultures. So based on these findings, we can also think about what it means beyond the case study in Hohhot. First, it's just that in the multilingual societies, language visibility alone is not enough to sustain a language. Even if a language appears in public spaces, its actual use may still decline due to the structural factors such as policy or education. Second, the findings suggest that the findings challenges the common assumption that language loss directly leads to identity loss. Instead, cultural identity can still persist in a symbolic way, even when daily language use is declined. Finally, the study highlights that the language policy operates indirectly rather than directly controlling individual behavior. It shapes the social and education environment, which in turn influence language use and identity over time. At the same time, these findings also show there are some future steps we can do to better understand this question in general. So first, the role of education needs more research. Since the study shows that education plays an important role in language use and culture transmission, future work could focus on how bilingual or monolingual education affects youth identity and people's identity. Second, future studies could also look on how policy affects not just language use, but everyday life more broadly. For example, how people adapt their behavior, values, and a sense of belonging in the society. There are also several limitations in my research. First, there are time and geographical limits. Since the research needs some field work in Inner Mongolia and I'm current in US, so the data collection process was limited by time and accessibility. Second, the language policy and cultural identity can be sensitive issues, which may lead some participants to provide more cautious or less detailed answers. Third, the sample size is relatively small. With only a limited number of participants, the findings may not fully represent the broader population in Inner Mongolia. Fourth, there are language and translation challenges. Since some of the participants are Mongolian native speakers, so it may be harder for them to communicate in Mandarin, and it may lead to their question not be deeper enough or specific enough. So in conclusion, this study examines how the promotion of standard Mandarin and the changes in linguist landscape influence youth cultural identity in Hohhot. The findings suggest that the changes in the linguist landscape, such as the decline of bilingual signage, do influence youth language use and cultural identity by shaping the visibility and daily communication in Mongolia in public spaces. However, these changes should not be seen as the root cause of language shift. Instead, they reflect deeper structural forces, especially language policy and education, which plays an important role in shaping both language practices and identity. At the same time, cultural identity is not disappearing, but is increasingly expressed in a more symbolic way as daily use of Mongolian is declining. So overall, this study suggests that the language policy does not necessarily reduce cultural identity itself, but reshapes how the identity is expressed and maintained. This highlights the importance of understanding language not only as a communication tool, but also a part of broader social and cultural structures. Thank you, and here are my sources. Any questions?
Did any of the youth that you interviewed recount any personal experiences or anecdotes that reflect like the structural ideas that you're pointing to? And do you have any personal experiences that reflect those ideas that you said were the sort of the root cause of the decline of Mongolian visibility?
Yeah, because I'm from Inner Mongolia, like these cities where I'm from. So basically, like in daily life, I can contact with a lot of Mongolian peers. But like in recent years, I found out like most of my friends, they just like don't use Mongolian in daily life, and or like their ability is like really low. And yeah, so basically, I just feel like the Mongolian culture in general and their language is like kind of like declining in recent years. So that's kind of like one thing I like lead me to do this research and like influence my personal experience.
So at this stage, do you have any suggestion to make the young people have more motivation to learn two language? Like one is the normal one in China and another is Mongolian language. Do you have any suggestion?
Well, as I said, like right now, the society in general and the educational system is not supporting people to learn Mongolian language. So I feel like if people really interested in like Mongolian, they can just like search online or something. Or like I feel like if people can improve the awareness of Mongolian culture or like get really interested in this part, probably it's kind of like benefit for them to like learn this language.
Okay, I have one more question. As you say about the language visibility, Do you think for young people, seeing Mongolian language as a actually change their identities or they represent their identities?
As I said, at the beginning, like before I do the real research step, I assumed that the language visibility is the real cause to influence the people's identity, because you have to use language every day. But later on, I realized actually the language declining is just like a deeper reflection of the policy and the social trend. So I feel like the social environment is like the deep cause to influence the youth identity, but not the language itself. Like they kind of have to combine together to influence the identity.
So, what was your favorite part of this research process?
I feel like my favorite part is when I do interviews with the Mongolian peers, because my family's not have a really strong Mongolian background, but so in this case, I it's not really familiar with the Mongolian culture or their language. So when I do interviews with the Mongolian peers, I got to know more information about their culture and daily life. And also I found it interesting, really interesting in paradox. Even though the Mongolian script was appeared on the signage before the policy is promoted, there are still a lot of mistakes they made when they doing the translate from Mandarin to Mongolian. So actually the signage, as I said, as my conclusion is that it's not the root cause of the influencing Mongolian identity. So it's really interesting to let me know more about the Mongolian culture.
I'm interested in a follow-up on that signage question, Freya.
Yeah.
Did you do any sort of data collection on the percentage of the signs that were in Mongolian versus Han, Mandarin, on the commercial versus residential? You talked about it, but it was pretty quick, so I wondered if you could.
Yeah, I did the percentage stuff, but I'm not sure if that's on the slides, but I did it in my paper. Yeah. So on the commercial street, most of them are in Mandarin only. I remember I did 114 signage in total, and 92.7% of them is in Mandarin, and only 7.3% of them is in bilingual form. And all of the signage in bilingual form was in the old version, they made them before 2022, when the policy was promoted. And in the residential street, I did research with about 64 different signage, and 58.8% of them are just in Mandarin only, and 41.2% of them is in bilingual. So it's kind of have a really low changing rate.
I was just curious. I saw some of your photos with the street signs, but I know in Mongolia they use the Cyrillic alphabet. It looked different in a lot of those photos. In Inner Mongolia, do they use the Cyrillic alphabet when they do use Mongolian, or is it the more traditional alphabet that was kind of lost in Mongolia?
Oh, that's a great question. So I can show you. It's kind of, they are speaking Mongolia, this country, and Inner Mongolia, this province in China, they speak the same language, but they use a different way to represent it in a character form. So you can see This one is like the traditional Mongolian characters, like we call them vertical script. And I think this is the only one vertical script in the world, like written like vertically. And this is the origin form of Mongolian language. But like, since Mongolia has like really strong connection with Soviet Union in the 20th century, so they kind of like switch their language like written form to alphabet, like the Cyrillic alphabet, to like better express their language. So like they have different accent and different tradition right now. But like the Mongolian, the country is also trying to like come back to with this traditional vertical script right now. Okay, thank you.